In this video, I discuss whether you should buy new, buy used, or lease your car in retirement. Coming up next on Holy Schmidt.
Holy Schmidt!
There's a wave of confusion in the buy new, buy used, or lease decision when it comes to acquiring a new car during your working years. This decision problem is exacerbated when one retires because retirees tend to drive about half the number of miles that those who are working drive. This isn't always the case, of course, because sometimes when people retire, they spend more time driving. They drive coast to coast. But the Federal Highway Administration says that those 65 and older tend to drive about 7,600 miles per year, and those that are working tend to drive 15,300 miles per year on average. Now, we've all heard the statistic that when you drive your car off the lot, it loses 20% of its value. In most cases, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you'll see in a moment that during the first year, a car does depreciate 3 times faster than the other years. All right, let's get into it. But before we do, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider clicking subscribe and turn on notifications so that you get alerted the next time I post a video. I post about twice a week. Also, if you haven't downloaded it already, go to my website, holyschmidt.com/checklist, and download my free retirement ready checklist. Once you input your information, it will be available to you instantly. All right, let's go. To make this analysis easy, I used the purchase data from the most popular sedan in America, that's the Toyota Camry. I also used depreciation data from Edmunds, one of the most respected car information companies for consumers. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the driving data from the Federal Highway Authority. With this information, it's pretty easy to see what the economics look like for you on the buy new, buy used, or lease decision. But I will point out that economics isn't the only reason, and for some people, not even the primary reason when they make a decision about how they buy their car. Some look at the experience, the driving experience, as the key determinant with which way to go. We'll talk about driving experience at the end. And just to get some other data out of the way, for the purposes of this video, we assume that the car won't have any major repairs at or until the 75,000 mile mark. Now, the data out there suggests that the major repairs start anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles, so 75,000 miles is a good point in time. It's also quite useful because it's divisible by either 7,500 or 15,000, which are remarkably close to the driving miles that those who are in retirement or those who are working put on their cars. We're going to use the Toyota Camry HSE as our test case. Why did I choose the HSE? Well, frankly, because my father-in-law loved the Toyota Camry HSE, and he was a pretty good judge of value. Option number 1, buy this car new. If you bought this car new, the list price is $38,692. Toyota also offers 3.99% financing for 48 months, so if you put 10% down, your payment would be $786.11. This rate is actually quite reasonable considering what some of the other car companies are offering. Still, as you know, I'm not a big fan of debt in retirement or debt in general, but this is entirely a personal choice. But I will note that if you do finance your car, you're paying $2,910 in interest costs over the 48-month period. Next up is miles driven. This is far more important than annual percentage rate because it could mean the difference between driving your car for 5 years, 10 years, even 15 years, depending on how many miles you put on the vehicle. And using the 75,000 mile rule that we talked about earlier, if you're an average driver, after 5 years, 15,000 miles per year times 5 years, you'll hit that point where you have to pay for a major repair. If you're retired and an average driver, then the number goes from 15,000 per year to about 7,500 per year, and that's a 10-year horizon before you have a major repair on average. And if you're willing to incur a few major repair costs along the way, post 75,000, you might be able to put on an extra 50 or even 75,000 miles or more on your Toyota Camry. Now that we have the basic data and understand the interplay between the miles driven and the longevity of the car, let's talk about depreciation. If you go to Edmunds.com, the first year depreciation on the Toyota Camry is $5,642. This is 15% of the value of the car. Now, assuming that one drives 15,000 miles in year 1, that's a depreciation rate of 38 cents a mile. Year 2, everything starts to normalize. The depreciation rate, according to Edmunds, in year 2 is $1,895. That's 13 cents per mile. So the second 15,000 miles, the car depreciates less than 1/3 as much as the first 15,000 miles. So there is some truth to the fact that your car loses a lot of value when you drive it off the lot, certainly over the first year that you own it, if nothing else, not 20%, but 10 to 15% depending on how many miles you put on your car. Year 3, the Camry depreciates by $1,792, which is 12 cents a mile. So the depreciation rate in year 3 is a little less than it is in year 2, which you would expect. But what's really interesting is what happens in year 4. It goes back up to $2,201, which is 14 cents a mile. Presumably this happens because cars are coming off leases and they're being resold, and they're being resold with a bit of profit, so the depreciation goes up. And in year 5, it's $1,993, or again, approximately 13 cents per mile. So if you buy your Toyota Camry new and you pay $38,692 and you drive it for 5 years, 75,000 miles approximately, at the end of the 5 years, your Camry is worth approximately $25,000, just over $25,000. Your automobile cost for that period is $13,424. That's $2,684 per year over the 5-year period, approximately. Now let's say that you didn't buy it new. You bought it used after 1 year with 15,000 miles. You actually pay $33,050. The value at year 5 is still $25,268. However, because you didn't pay for the car new, you avoided the first year big depreciation expense. So if you buy it used after 1 year, your actual cost for the 4-year period is $7,782 or $1,945 per year. By purchasing it after 1 year of ownership, your actual annual cost goes down by $739 per year. By the way, looking at the depreciation, whether you buy it after 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, your actual bang for the buck, meaning the actual value that you're paying for, doesn't change much because the depreciation doesn't change much over the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th year. Still, I would recommend that you buy it with at least 1 or 2 years of the manufacturer's warranty still on the car, just in case something goes wrong that you didn't anticipate. Car values depreciate by both age and miles, and age has a bigger impact on the financial value of the car than miles. As you can see, a Toyota Camry with 75,000 miles after 5 years has a value of approximately 65% of the new purchase price. Of course, these are all retail numbers. If you traded your car in, your number would probably be less. But here's a really important point. You undoubtedly know somebody who has a car that has a lot of age, but not a lot of miles. Dealerships are falling all over themselves to get their hands on that car. Why? Because people in the know, people who watch videos like this, realize that they can buy a car that's quite old in numerical years, but with low miles, that car can last a very, very long time, and they'll get a great value for the purchase price. Remember, life expectancy of a car is based more on miles driven than years of service in most cases. So if you're a typical retiree that drives approximately 7,600 miles per year, and you buy a car with 15,000 miles on it, that car should last at least another 8, 10, maybe even 12 or 15 years without any major repairs. But here's the $5,642 question. If you bought a car used and you drove it for 8 or 10 years, after a year or two, do you think you would really be able to tell the difference if you bought it used or you bought it new? The answer for most people, by the way, would be no. The reason that this is such an important question is that when you buy that new car, for the first few days, it has no dings, it has no scratches on the wheel, but that very quickly goes away and you have a good car with minor imperfections that most people wouldn't notice, except for you. A word of advice, if you're going to buy your car slightly used, get your car examined by your independent mechanic, the one that you trust, not the one at the dealership, and get a Carfax report. A Carfax report is $39.95, and it will give you the history of the car, including any major expenditures on the car. If there's a big expenditure, that's a good sign that something has happened. The car might have been in an accident. Some cars are never the same after an accident, so if you do see that major expense and that hasn't been disclosed to you, it's probably a good idea to walk away unless you really know what you're doing. And some people do. Also, the independent inspection from your mechanic will probably cost $100, $200, but it may uncover some things that you couldn't see on your own. I know someone who had their car inspected by an independent mechanic and they found Berkebile fluid in the transmission. Now, that doesn't hurt the car. In fact, frankly, it's used to keep the transmission in good shape, but it's also an indication that something is wrong with the transmission because it plugs up leaks. The last category is leasing your car. Now, as you saw from the Toyota Camry example, the first few years are the most expensive years in car ownership. Year one, there was a $5,642 depreciation cost. But payments are less. How could that be if the most expensive point to own the car is in the first few years? Well, remember what happened to the Toyota Camry. After 5 years, it had a value of over $25,000. But when you lease a car, you're renting the car. You have no residual value. You have to give it back. And since you lease a car typically for 3 years, 36,000 miles, you're giving it back, and the person who buys it will be buying the car with 65-75% equity in it, meaning that you have overpaid at least a bit, because my guess is that over the 3-year period, you would have paid more than the difference between the new car price and the equity value of the car when you turned it back in. So back to the point I made in the beginning. If there's not an economic advantage to leasing, why do a lot of people do it? Well, frankly, there is a big emotional component to leasing a car. It feels great to take possession of a new car every 2 to 3 years. The car will have the newest tech. It will have the best safety. It'll be the most fuel efficient of that series. Also, you're not making a down payment, and your payments are generally less, so your cash flow at that particular point in time is lower. Also, your financial commitment is only captured for the 36 months. And for someone who's had a lifetime of financial commitment, whether it's a mortgage, kids' college, etc., having no or low commitment does have an appeal to it, even if it's not the best decision financially. If you like this video, make sure that you click subscribe and turn on notifications so that you get alerted the next time I post. I post once or twice a week. Also, if you like this video, check out that video. Retirees spend 80% of their income in these 5 areas. How do you compare? That video has had over 650,000 views as of a few weeks ago anyway, and it's moving up fast. Also, don't forget to go to holyschmidt.com/checklist to get your free retirement ready checklist. This is Jeff Schmidt. Thanks for watching.